I own so much property in this town, and this is true. These white people think I'm responsible for their well-being. That's ridiculous. I'm not no public servant. I'm a capitalist.
Message.
So Chappelle dropped a somewhat surprise Netflix special, and in so doing, I think has helped clarify for me, likely biased by some other work I'm involved in, that he is extending and practicing and maybe even perfecting what Soot Jali has previously termed the Cosby effect.
I mix what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like, what I like.
What's up, world? Welcome back to I Mix What I Like. Again, I'm Jared Ball, happy to be your host. Please make sure you like, share, subscribe, support the Patreon if you can, even joining for free. All the links are in the show description. So, as I'm going to show you in just a second, overly simplified, the Cosby effect is a presentation of a form of blackness that appeases white affluent sensibilities, and specifically in this case, presents black people in the public sphere abnormally as representing or as representative of a black bourgeois affluent version of the ruling elite. So as I'm going to try to quickly show what Soot Jali, the legendary media scholar, and some of his colleagues have termed as the Cosby effect, was perfected by Bill Cosby during the Cosby Show, transferred through Barack Obama, politicizing the Cosby effect into the presidency, and I think is being done here again by Chappelle, back in its original, more comedic, entertainment, performative version, but ultimately here to do the same thing. And again, that is to present a version of blackness and even critique of society that doesn't ultimately end up upsetting liberal, ruling, white, elite, affluent sensibilities, even as it promotes itself as a critique, as cutting edge, as even as I think he did in this more recent special, maybe as well as any time before, presenting himself as also a symbolic representation of black pride, and not just excellence in the commercial sense, but black advance, even radical politics. And as we'll see him explain himself, as Soot Jali has talked about, the Cosby effect is the impact on other programming and the increased inclusion of black excellence and success stories. And I'm arguing that Chappelle, as he has said before, if he wants credit, for instance, for having an impact on pop culture and black entertainment through, for instance, shows like Key and Peele, that he has argued in the past have sort of taken his Chappelle Show mantle and run with it after he took that self-imposed exile to Africa after rejecting the 50 million from Comedy Central back in the day. But then if he is going to recognize himself, that is Chappelle, as having influence on others, then quite to the point of Soot Jali and the Cosby effect that argues about the reverberating impact on other media product, then Chappelle would have to be recognized either by himself or at least by us as having impact on other programming. And we can also see how such impact benefits the existing purpose or function of dominant media, that is, in setting norms and establishing acceptable ranges of politics. Hence, as we'll come back to, Chappelle setting the political edge firmly at Bernie Sanders at the farthest left, and black capitalism as his foundation. So again, as a longtime fan of his comedy, we get brilliant comedy. We get that long form storytelling that comes back around with a punchline that you may not have expected. I don't know that he did this as well in this one as he's done in the past, but it's still there. We get a number of references to black pride, anti-white humor. But as I started to describe this as a bait and switch, what ends up purporting to be some sort of anti-white, pro-black, critical view and assessment of society is ultimately one that is very safely couched in liberal bourgeois politics, where again Bernie Sanders, as he says in the show, this most recent one, is as much as we can expect in terms of left politics. And ultimately, what we get is a staunch defense of black capitalist politics and broader capitalist politics. I noted here that Chappelle, pun intended, has become the Cosby of comedy, not reflecting the abuses of Cosby against women and the pill Cosby and all of that, but the political role, the Cosby effect, the pre-existing role he had been playing, or maybe it was simultaneous, given how old those allegations were, but how far they go back. But in terms of Sut Jali's Cosby effect and and Cosby's impact on media in presenting an affluent, abnormal version of blackness that was meant to appease white affluent society, Chappelle has evolved in a very slick, because he brings the Eddie Murphy, Richard Pryor piece that Cosby didn't bring. He brings that cool, irreverent, cigarette smoking, N-word using, cussing version that Cosby wouldn't have brought. But it's the 21st century, nuanced, even more sophisticated version of the Cosby effect, where the affluence is couched in a very mainstream, down-to-earth performance. But as I'm going to show you, Chappelle is very clear. He's constantly reminding us that he is abnormal. But I'm saying that he's become the new Cosby of comedy because, as Sut Jali has said of Obama and Barack and Bill Cosby, there is no other way to this level of success. That is, without appeasing a white affluent audience, there is no way to become a black president or a black successful entertainer or ultimately anything in this society. So Chappelle's criticism of racism and the world is couched safely, ultimately, within the confines of his class solidarity with the ruling elite, never going farther again than Bernie Sanders. And Chappelle expresses happiness to take money from the same people who rule, be it Netflix or Saudi Arabia. So if this country can sell Saudi Arabia weapons, why can't Chappelle sell them jokes, especially when they are functionally one and the same? The extension of U.S. empire that's meant to be carried with the sale of weapons to Saudi Arabia is no different than the extension of U.S. empire that's meant to be carried through the sale of Chappelle and his jokes to Saudi Arabia and to the world and to a white affluent audience here. All right, but having at least laid some of the foundation I'm using to arrive at my conclusion, let me show you a little bit more about what I'm talking about.
Since the mid-1980s, there's developed another set of images. Okay, what we could call more positive images, in which black people are presented as having moved into the middle class and the upper middle class. There are now lots of black characters who are shown in primetime television, not just as criminals and pimps, but as holding professional jobs like doctors and lawyers, etc. Okay,
or being successful, massively successful comics.
This has been termed the Cosby effect. And I think actually in 1984, when I'm presuming everyone has seen the Cosby Show, and with the Huxtables, when the Cosby Show went on the air, it actually transformed. I think there is a pre-Cosby moment and a post-Cosby moment when it comes to racial representations. And I think Obama has very explicitly and deliberately played upon this second story.
So I'm not saying Chappelle has done this in the same way at all. In fact, I'm really saying that Chappelle his celebrity has entered into a world created by the previous interventions and abuses by and of Cosby and Barack Obama. So, in other words, the lane that they paved, Chappelle sort of just walked into, even unwittingly. Although I think he is smart enough to have figured it out and even to craft his approach in this way. And if I think it could be argued that Chappelle's skill at storytelling and weaving narrative and jokes and humor and criticism suggests that he could have thought of this consciously, but I'm also saying it, but really I think it's even more important to point out that it wouldn't be necessary for him to do it consciously. And that's even more, I think, how to a certain extent, that's that's a demonstration of the more powerful and sophisticated nature of this society's media and political environment. But in any event.
Now, on the one hand, the reaction of Black Americans to these images is actually very, very interesting to look at and deeply moving. That is, when you haven't had images of yourself as decent, as dignified, then in fact, when you see these images, there is incredible gratitude for those images. Because it now means that white America actually has to have another image in its head when they see you. That is, for too long, the image of black people had been hijacked by white scriptwriters in Hollywood with their strange images and with their nightmares of what black life was about. And Cosby, for the first time, gave a dignified picture of what, a human picture of what black life could be about or was about as well.
And what Chappelle does is collapse any divide that would occur, that had occurred, where mainstream black audiences and communities evolved a certain distance and even hostility towards the Cosby Show and its representation. And you know, the sort of apex of that was when, of course, Eddie Murphy did the famous joke about being called by Cosby and told to clean up his act. And Murphy referred to Richard Pryor, who told, of course, through Murphy, the funny line of telling Bill Cosby to have a Coke and a smile and to shut the fuck up, which was giving permission back to the mainstream average black audience member that you don't have to aspire to some white styled perfect middle class version of blackness like the Cosby Show and Cosby had done in his own career. You can be yourself and still be as successful and so on and so forth. But the slickness in that is that it's still what is appeasing white affluent ad buyers, audiences, et cetera, and so forth. Otherwise, as we'll come back to, there would be no Netflix. There would be no nothing, no matter how much these black audiences and others may like Chappelle.
And I think actually on election night, okay, those scenes in Hyde Park, you know, where you have people, you know, the leaders of the civil rights movement crying, you know, when you have Jesse Jackson crying, who's no fool, right? He knows politically what's going on.
We could debate that.
Right? When those are real, and those tears and that feeling was real. It was powerful and real. We did a study, myself and my colleague.
And I would say the same thing still exists today in one form or another. Black audiences are still looking for that symbolic victory. They're still looking for that sign of there's something coming around the bend. And in fact, in this Chappelle ends the show by sort of cheerleading and encouraging. You know, we're going to survive this orange devil or whatever he's saying. You know, we're going to make it through. He's still able to tap into that pre-existing desire to be seen, even in the context of hostility, and maybe because of the context of hostility and settler colonial violence. Black America still wants, all people still want to be seen as part of that cultural store, as Harold Cruz once described it. But it still has to conform to a certain politic. And I think that's where Chappelle's performance becomes even more sophisticated, nuanced, and complicated in identifying and clarifying.
Justin Lewis did a study in 1992 on the Cosby Show. And we actually did an audience study on the Cosby Show, which was we actually talked to people, both to audiences, both fans of the show, both black and white. And we wanted to ask, well, what is it about the show that you like? What is it, you know? And then the question we wanted to get to was, okay, how does then this affect how you think about race? How does this then affect how you think about the differences of hair, skin, and bone? How does this affect how you think about the city, the inner city? The reaction to Cosby, and by extension to the new black, because actually because network television, people who make network television have no idea what's going to be successful. Most shows, in fact, are not successful, right? Most shows. And so when something works, they copy it incessantly. And so when Cosby worked, when the Cosby Show worked, it led to an explosion of black professional characters across the whole range of prime time. That's the Cosby effect. It's not just the show. It's what effect Cosby had on all the other images on mainstream television.
And I would argue, so I'm not in this way saying that Chappelle is creating the effect that Cosby created. What I would argue is that, or what I think I'm wanting to argue, given my reaction to this most recent performance, is that Chappelle is, again, unwittingly, not necessarily consciously, is updating the Cosby effect and benefiting from an updated version of the Cosby effect. That is, once there was this explosion of black attempts to copy Cosby's black professional performance of blackness, and there were attempts to duplicate it, and those attempts did not succeed, I think in part because of the black backlash against an overly bourgeois, fantastical depiction of the black experience. One also that perhaps didn't do enough to appease white audiences' desire to see a more inferior form of black performance. My point, though, is that what I think ends up happening is that Chappelle takes up a rebranded or reshaped version where the presentation and the performance of popular blackness is not as clean cut and bourgeois perhaps as Cosby, but it is still aspiring to the same class and political level or lane that Cosby occupied, and therefore retains the safety for white American pop culture that Chappelle does, and therefore he's able to do so well in these spaces, even while appeasing so in many ways mainstream black symbolism. That is, he comes across more, that is, Chappelle comes across more as the everyman. So he doesn't come across as the sweater wearing, clean cut, never cursing Cosby, and is therefore more disarming to a mainstream audience, even while carrying the same black capitalist, bourgeois worldview and politics.
The reaction to the Cosby Show actually tells us a great deal, and by extension to the new black professionals, tells us a great deal, not just about race, but also about social class. It tells us what is considered normal within our society. That is what Cosby did. This is what Cosby did. To make black people normal to white people. You can't have a #1 rated show and not be popular with everyone. It's impossible. You have to be popular with everyone. For different
Can't be successful on Netflix. Same, that context remains even in a new digital media environment.
reasons, but you have to be popular with everyone. And what he did to make black people normal in the world of television was to make them abnormal in the real world experiences of the black community.
And that's what I'm saying Chappelle is doing. And I'm going to play you an example in just a minute to demonstrate my point, but that's what I'm ultimately saying Chappelle is doing. Appeasing the same white upper bourgeois ruling elite sentiments, just doing it in a more so-called everyman style.
What he did was, a lot of people talked about how, what the Huxtables were simply, what Bill Cosby did was make them white. That's why people liked them. Nope, wasn't. What he did, the way he made them normal was he made them middle class. And on television, that is what normality is. Most characters on television are middle class. To be normal on television means actually being abnormal in terms of the rest of the world.
And if you are a white audience member looking for that so-called authentic black experience, but one that doesn't threaten you or make you uncomfortable, Chappelle ultimately becomes the perfect performer, because he's still, again, in affect, in performance, and aesthetic, he's still doing all of the stereotypical preferred black performance. He's hitting all the standard performative stereotypical preferences that a white society would want. So it's not that obviously black audiences don't enjoy it. It's not that he's not funny. It's not that he's not talented. It's that it's a performance that will read as authentic and acceptable to whites as well. Whereas Cosby, very much the opposite. And that's, again, that's where, Chappelle is even a more sophisticated version, a more disarming version in terms of both communities, because nobody's going to read him in the way that they would read Cosby, as perhaps less authentically representing the black experience. But here, the abnormality that Jali is still pointing to still is in effect because of Chappelle's preference clearly for his celebrity and class position.
Television families are highly skewed upwards in terms of how much money they earn and the kinds of lifestyles they live. And if that is shown every day on television, people watch that becomes normal. To be working class on television actually is a negative thing. Actually, to call yourself working
that
class
still holds.
Culture is to relegate yourselves to the margins, which means the working class, people who work in factories or in service occupations, or as clerks, or in offices, or as janitors, or as waitresses, that is the vast bulk of the 99%. They do not appear very often on network television, on our mainstream media. And when they do, they are perceived in a negative way. You can count on the fingers of one hand the number of shows that have featured working class characters that present them in dignified ways. When they do appear, they often appear as presented as clowns or as dumb. Okay, but in the post-Cosby era, this is the second story we're still in. In the post-Cosby era, there are many black professionals on primetime television. But it's done in a very, very specific way. And this, when I say Obama learned from this, this is what he learned. And it was this version, of blackness that Obama wrapped himself in. Because Obama told a story about race during the election. Okay, but he was a black man. He wasn't just white, he was running as a black man, but a particular kind of black man. Okay, this is Harper's Magazine talking about, this is Cosby they're talking about now, but you can, actually every time you see Cosby you can just put Obama in instead. Right? It talks about Cosby as a kind of priest, forgiving the sins of the past of the white audience. He makes them an offer they can't refuse. He says, his vast audience knows that Cosby will never assault their innocence with racial guilt. Racial controversy is all but banished from the show. The Huxtable family never discusses affirmative action.
So again, I would argue Chappelle doesn't do it this way. He's again, it's much more sophisticated. He will mention problems of the day. He'll mention police brutality. He'll talk about George Floyd. He'll talk about war, and he'll do all of that. But he does it in a way that I still think does the same thing that Jali is talking about here. That it doesn't assault white innocence with racial guilt. And I think that in part is done through Chappelle's criticism of other communities, his use of the N-word, his comedy. He's hilarious. And I think in the end, it's disarming and allows a particularly liberal white, the liberal wing of the white ruling elite, to not feel assaulted and to not have their innocence challenged. And then you add as he did a little bit in this most recent one, you come back to the trans jokes. You talk about, as I'll come back to, a friendly way, even as you're critical of John McCain. He talks about he's walked out on stage previously with Elon Musk. He talks, so Chappelle is still demonstrating his solidarity with the ruling elite, with capitalism, with the state, even as he's critical of it. even as he's saying he can speak more freely in Saudi Arabia. But as I said, he's selling Saudi Arabia jokes in the same way, the same country he's being critical of, and the same country that says it wants to condemn 9/11 and so on and so forth, sells them weapons. So it in the end it's another way, I think, of him saying, I'm not a threat, even with my red, black, and green and my Kaepernick jacket and my clear love of black people and my Stevie Wonder stories. I'm not a threat.
The bargain Cosby offered his white viewers, I will confirm your racial innocence if you accept me, is a good deal for all concerned. Not only does it allow whites to enjoy Cosby's humor with no loss of innocence, but it actually enhances their innocence by implying that race is not the serious problem for blacks that it once was.
I definitely think Chappelle has that impact. I'm not saying it's by design or intent, but I think it has that impact on his white audiences. And I think by extension, his black audiences, with his selling the fantasy of black capitalist success through his own singular experience. I'm going to come back to that in a second, but that's what I think is happening.
On Thursday nights, Cosby, like a priest, absolves his white viewers, forgives and forgets the sins of the past. He tells his white viewers each week that they are okay and that this black man is not going to challenge them. Obama has done exactly the same thing. By the way, if you want to be a #1 show on television, this is what you have to do. Okay? I'm presenting this as a critique, but there's nothing else. It's not like they could have done anything else. If he'd done something else, he wouldn't have been the most popular show on television. If Obama had done something else, he wouldn't be elected president. I have a very critical perspective on this, but there's also, it's not as though, I'm saying, well, if he just, embraced his blackness, no, that would have been absolutely deadly.
And in the end, I'm saying the exact same thing about Chappelle, in the sense that he can't. I have a critical view of his performance and the function and the relationship to media and all of this. But at the end of the day, there's nothing else that he could do and be there. This is, again, the point about my iron triangle. You can't be rich, famous, and politically radical at the same time. So again, this is not about, this is not a personal condemnation of Chappelle or criticism of even his art. It is just a recognition, I think, of the context and the ultimate role and function he's being put to and clearly benefiting from. And here's an example of what I'm attempting to describe.
And I'm sorry I didn't come home sooner, but I've been very busy in Ohio. And a lot of people say, what are you doing out there? And I don't know if you know this, but this is true. I'll tell you what I've been doing. The town that I've been living in for the last 25 years, I bought most of it. I like it there.
And listen to the crowd's reaction. So the idea is, in the very, black capitalist, black business, black excellence way, I bought most of the town. And everybody starts cheering. Why? We want to see black men succeed. And success means you buy up everything and own everything. Does it mean anything of value to anyone else? Does it mean anything is being done to benefit any other black or otherwise anyone else? Is it radical? No. But it's still applause worthy.
Ohio loves Trump, but this town I live in is like a little itty bitty Bernie Sanders Island in the Trump seat.
And again, I know it's a joke, it's humorous, but I think he's making the point that Dave Chappelle, bought up this little black utopia or blackish utopia in this Trump white world, but it's just a Bernie Sanders thing. It's not a revolutionary nationalist. It's not a real socialist. It's not anything threatening. It doesn't even challenge U.S. foreign policy because, as we know, Bernie is no radical internationalist. So and that again can get an applause line while not at all threatening anyone in any ruling elite of any racial background.
All the whites are poor out there, but these are like the dirty hippie whites, and I like them. I like these whites. And they like me too. But you know what I learned about liberal white people? Liberal white people let black people do whatever the fuck they want until you buy most of their town. Oh, they frowned on that. Them whites got real suspicious. But you know what? I don't blame them. Because, no, for real, because look, if I was white and the people in this town were black, you know what they'd say? They would say I was gentrifying the town. But there's no word for what I'm doing to these people. I own everything, nigga, everything.
So maybe in some sense he's right. There is no specific, but this is neocolonialism. This is black capitalism. This is, you know, so maybe the specifics of him being black and them and owning everything in this white town and all of that needs a new term. But it's black gentrification, or you know, but it's class gentrification. It's capitalism. It's you know, there are words that could be, you know, brought to.
I used to be mad at white people when I was young because I thought they were unfair. But now that I have all this property, I understand them. It's fun. Feels good to walk up to white people like, are you supposed to be here? Calling the police. It's fun.
And again, it's humorous, but it's just a role reversal. And we're supposed to be excited by this. Again, even in this largely, you know, performative story or apocryphal story, there are no black people benefiting from any of this. It's just all a feeling and a vibe that the audience is meant to take away. And we're meant to, and I guess maybe people are meant to go home with this idea that the world isn't so bad because Chappelle is given the business to these liberal whites.
I own so much property in this town, and this is true. These white people think I'm responsible for their well-being. That's ridiculous, nigga. I'm not no public servant. I'm a capitalist. I'll be walking down the street minding my own business, and they come up to me with their concerns. Dave, congratulations on buying the whole goddamn town. But you need to start thinking about some affordable housing around here. And I'll be like, well, actually, champ, I can afford my house. That sounds like some shit you need to worry about. Because if I think about it, I can afford your house too. So if you want to sell, come holler at your boy. I'm collecting the whole town. I'm collecting the whole goddamn town.
And a big applause break. So to me, again, there's plenty to enjoy and laugh at and to criticize in the episode in the performance. But to me, that was a good example or a perfect exemplar of where I think Chappelle is politically and how he situates himself. So again, we get some of the symbolism. We get the RBG logo. We get the former connection to Dead Prez and that block party historically and the liberal wing of the music world. He's wearing the camo, the Kaepernick camo fly. You know, he had already we have that legendary rejection of Comedy Central and 50 Million and the exile into South Africa and his reemergence as an even bigger star. We get, again, the black support in the audience for his performance in Saudi Arabia, which, again, I still only think is mostly made meaningful in that you know, he's selling jokes in the same way this country is happy to sell them weapons. We of course get the great moment of him, you know, telling Bill Maher to go fuck himself. I mean, who's not here for that? Who's not going to enjoy that? And then of course we get his concluding mic drop joke about Israel killing 270 journalists. So he does this. So again, Chappelle is a master comedian. He is I think as good as anyone has ever been at doing that task. So when he makes the point about being criticized for going to Saudi Arabia after they killed that, you know, Khashoggi, the one journalist, he then turns around and points out and says that he does that whole great thing at the end where he says, you know, we need to have a way of knowing if I've been bought and it's sold out, and you'll know if I will come up with something that I'll say that will automatically let you know that I've been bought out and you should never listen to anything I say after that. And then of course he says is his mic drop line that would be, I stand with Israel. And then he walks off stage. So you get the critique of Israel at the end in some way. You get, again, these other symbolic allusions to something more progressive and radical. But in addition to the clip that I just played, if you even listen carefully to the way he weaves and tells the story throughout his show about Jack Johnson and the Great White Hope and why he thinks Diddy got arrested, which obviously, you can see for yourself. What I think you see that he does there is explain where he is politically, and it demonstrates again some of what I've tried here to quickly show that I think he's doing, because he does this great job of telling the story of Jack Johnson, the first black heavyweight boxing champion, and all that meant, and him beating these white. He does a great job of telling these the history in a funny way. But if you listen carefully, he uses as sort of the tagline. He's trying to make a point about Jack Johnson and the white women he used to like to spend time with, and the Congressman Mann, who creates the Mann Act as a way of creating a federal charge against black, Jack Johnson, but any black man who would take a white woman across state lines. And then it's the Mann Act that is brought in to arrest Diddy. Now, at one point I looked it up, and I think Chappelle orchestrates a little storytelling. He recounts a time when he is saved from an assailant on stage, and he says that Diddy came up to save him, and he credits Diddy for this. And this is a way of kind of weaving in his critique of what has happened with Diddy while not defending Diddy, of course. But in reality, when I look in real life, allegedly his savior in that moment was Jamie Foxx, not Diddy. So I wonder why he chose to use that and to create that poetic license, if it wasn't just an honest mistake. I don't know. But what he ends up doing, though, and if you follow this thread throughout and pay attention as he weaves in and out of his use of the story of Jack Johnson, he quotes Johnson as saying at the end of his life something to the effect about him not having any regrets, and that he says, as Chappelle, he says, and I quote him here. Chappelle quotes Jack Johnson as saying, "I risked everything for my pleasure," end quote. And Chappelle uses this as a praiseworthy applause line, which I think he's using to justify his own choices and his own decisions, whether it's to perform in Saudi Arabia, whether it's to make fun of trans folks, whether it's to justify his class position, whether it's whatever he's doing. He uses that line to say, "I risked everything for my pleasure." And he's inviting, that is, Chappelle invites us to applaud him for that and support him for that and to aspire to that for ourselves, which is a way of deflecting any criticism that might come from those of us who would say, have a couple of questions about the role or function of celebrity in a society as unequal and hostile as this, or who might be critical of his promotion of black capitalist bourgeois politics. So by the time anyone raises any concerns around his proclamation, his self-definition as a capitalist, we would be invited to, or should any of us raise criticisms around his class position, the targets of his humor, or anything else, he's already provided the intellectual comedic prophylactic of saying, like Jack Johnson did, the heroic Jack Johnson, who all he wanted and all he ended up wanting to do after achieving the heavyweight champion status and defeating all the great white hopes was run off with white girls, to risk everything for his own pleasure. And that becomes the tagline that I think Chappelle wants us to walk away with and to accept from him and anyone else in his position. Not to risk anything for anyone else, not to risk anything for the betterment of humanity in the world, but only for my own pleasure. And if anyone does that, if anyone risks anything for their own pleasure, we should support, defend, and even applaud them.